Well, it's time for us to get started for our Bible study. So, good morning, everyone. It is good to see you today. We are continuing our study of Exodus. So, if you want to open up your Bible to Exodus 24, that's where we're going to be today. I hope you got a handout as you came in that will try to get us through Exodus 24 and then 32 through 34. That was the homework, if you remember from last week or saw the email that went out. I heard Amanda talking about church homework this week. So this is church homework, all right? I'm not going to ask you if you did the church homework. I will assume you did. But it's never too late. You can do makeup work later if you didn't do it beforehand. Good. So this seems really hot. Maybe bring it down, John, if you can, just a notch or two. I'm getting some feedback on the mic here. Just maybe a notch or two down. Thank you. I want to have some room to yell when I need to. So, what we did in the last couple of weeks in class, just as a reminder of where we are in Exodus, so because we're doing just going to do a little bit of skipping around here. You've got in Exodus, the second half of the book here, narrative and law. So narratives and then what we think of as law. Okay, law, that word that we translate into law from Hebrew is called Torah, and it means really just instruction, teaching, in this case from God. So in general, all the book of Exodus is part of Torah. But when we think about law and think about sort of specific instructions and rules, not story, not narrative, but the more legal material, we've got narrative, story, and then the instructions and laws, and then another story, and then laws. Okay, so what we did in the last couple of weeks is look at the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, in chapter 20. Then there's a little story in between right after that, and then chapters 21 through 23 are more the specific case laws. If you own a bull and it gores someone. Remember that discussion, okay? As an example of the if-then sort of laws. More practical, how you put the principles of the Ten Commandments, which are summed up in love God and love your neighbor. What does it mean, on the ground when this scenario happens, all right? And so those laws have been given, and then we get to chapter 24. The story here. So let's spend just a little time here in chapter 24, which I have called here, Israel Accepts the Covenant. They already did this in a preliminary way in chapter 19 when they arrived at the foot of Mount Sinai. They said, we will do what the Lord commands. It wasn't clear whether they knew all those commands yet or not, but this was their first, hey, God has done these things for us. He came down to us. He brought us out of Egypt. He has taken care of us on the journey to Mount Sinai. And he said he's going to be our God. We're going to be his people. We will do that. Well, now in chapter 24, we're going to see that Moses reveals these laws to them. So there's no sort of ignorance here about what they're getting into. You like to know before you make an agreement or a covenant with someone a little bit about what you're getting into. Maybe at the beginning of a marriage covenant, you don't know everything. Some of that's going to be revealed within the relationship and over the years, what you have gotten into, all right? All good things, okay? But you like to know ahead of time a little bit, perhaps, what you're getting into, what you're agreeing to here, all right? So Israel now has that opportunity, chapter 24. Let's just read, actually, especially for those who did your homework at the beginning of the week and it's been, a few days. A little reminder here. Verses 3 through 11. So, can I get a brave volunteer to read Exodus 24, 3 through 11? Nice and loud for us. Please, anyone? Pam, thank you. All right. Thank you very much. So, verse 3, what I was saying there, Moses told the people all of the laws, it says. And the people said, what? We will do it. Yeah. So he's heard these laws revealed. He's now revealing them to the people, and they say, everything the Lord has said, we will do. Then verse 4 says Moses wrote down these laws. So here's sort of early evidence in this story of these laws being written down, not just in oral form, but now in some sort of writing, so that there's a permanence, more or less, to it, and stability to their existence. Okay. So he writes it down, and again in verse 7, they respond. We will do everything the Lord has said, we will obey. So that's after he reads. It says now the book of the covenant, verse 7. Okay. So whether that's just like the 10 commandments, or it's everything there from chapters 21 to 23, or something like that, little unclear. But, as it's telling it, there's some sort of book that he has written some or all of these things in, and now they say, yeah, we will do it. So twice now in chapter 24, they agree to this. What else do you see or hear in those verses 3 through 11? Anything sort of jump out or strike you as interesting or puzzling or whatever? Just open forum here on those verses we just heard. Yeah, verse 5, right, is the question here. It says, so Moses got up early, built an altar, this is verse 4, set up pillars. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. And then Moses took this, so he's involved in it. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure why young men, but it doesn't say how many sacrifices, but there were multiple sacrifices here. That is, every time you read in the Old Testament, by the way, that they offered this or that sacrifice, or this or that animal for sacrifice, or this many hundreds of bulls for sacrifice, just imagine. I mean, our eyes sort of, at least mine do, just sort of skim over that really easily because it's so foreign to me. I didn't grow up on a ranch, I do eat beef, but that's about as close as I get to a cow. Um, there's a lot of work involved in they offered a sacrifice. Just there's a lot of mess, there's a lot of stuff going on with that. So I think this is just Moses delegating this responsibility. It's not clear that there is the priests have not been ordained yet, so there's not specific priests to do this yet. These may be some of the future priests, I don't know, but this is a good job for young men to do. Moses is there with them, probably supervising them, because right after that, he's the one who does something with the blood that comes from these sacrifices. But yeah, that's all I take it to be, is some helpers here who are able-bodied men to help with it. Chris? No. Yeah. Yeah. This is a hard job for multiple people. So, right. Yeah, Michael. So Nadab and Abihu are mentioned there in verse 9, I believe. And they are the sons of Aaron. It doesn't say there, does it? That they are. Oh, yeah, verse 1. Yep. Yeah, they are sons of Aaron, and so they will be ordained as priests in the opening chapters of Leviticus. And then famously, those two, at the very opening of the tabernacle, the very first worship assembly, they disobey the instructions that were meticulously given, and they are struck down. So they are justly famous for that. This is before that, so yeah, I think it's looking ahead to their role as priests. Good. What else, Pam? Yeah, so here's another one of those cases where it's just like these offerings are specified in Leviticus 1 through 7, so they haven't been. In reading through Exodus, you wouldn't know what those are here. So it's just the burnt offering is an offering where the whole animal is burned up and given to God. A fellowship offering, and there are certain times and so forth for bringing a burnt offering. A fellowship offering, sometimes in some versions, it's called a peace offering. It just you see different translations for it. Shalomim is the Hebrew there. It comes from the word shalom, peace. A well-being offering. It's sort of a voluntary offering that Israelites could offer whenever they wanted to thank God for something, or maybe a specific time of the year. And it was one where the whole animal was not burned up, but actually shared as a meal with the worshiper who brought it and others. So it's just different kinds of offerings. I think it's just saying here there were a lot of sacrifices being offered at this time. But those distinctions will become clearer in Leviticus 1 through 7. Other thoughts, or what else is sort of anything prominent that sticks out to you from these verses here? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. So the contrast here between verses 1 and 2, where it's worship from afar, only Moses can approach the Lord in proximity. contrasted with verses 9 through 11, where Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders went up into the proximate presence of the Lord, so near that it says they saw the God of Israel. I don't know what they saw, and it's describing some sort of manifestation here. Of course, they didn't see God in all his glory. That discussion actually comes later here in Exodus. But they see something that is a manifestation, a visual manifestation of God, and there's a short description there that you can see in verse 10. I think it's just saying that, like it said before, one is to guard the holiness and the transcendence of God, that God is not to be lightly approached, and so you worship at a distance here. At the same time, God's holiness, as we see throughout Scripture, invites relationship and fellowship. And what's the difference here? It could be the offerings and sacrifices that happen in between. That's maybe a possibility there. But whatever it is, I think the lesson here is that naturally there is a distance between God and creation, including humans. But by God's grace, there is a relationship of nearness and fellowship and proximity and love for the people that he has chosen to be in covenant with, who he invites to worship him. And that's what's happening here. But notice the language of verse 11. They see God, they're there in his presence, but God did not what? Raise his hand against them. So even there, the writer here is saying, if somebody sees God and they're there in the presence of God, then you expect something bad to happen to that person. But it's saying, no, this is, again, God graciously allowing this and inviting this relationship so that they see God, they're in God's direct presence, and he spared them. They're sinful, but there's grace and forgiveness and the holiness of God, instead of destroying them, is sanctifying them. You might say rubbing off on them in a good way. So he did not raise his hand against them. They saw God, and the rest of verse 11 is equally amazing. They ate and drank in the presence of God. Right? Chris? Mm-hmm. Yep, good example, illustration of that. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, so Esther, the story of Esther is a good illustration of how this works on the human level, even, where the king, the superior here, who has the right of life and death, ostensibly over the citizens, can destroy someone who comes into the king's presence, but can also graciously offer relationship and presence and spare that person who came in uninvited or whatever. Yeah. Good. I see a lot of, we sort of talked about this with the sacrifices, but one thing that just jumps out at me here also is just a lot of blood. There's a lot of blood in this. Between especially these verses like 4 or 5 through 8 there. So all these sacrifices, Moses takes half of the blood and sprinkles it on the altar, and the other half on what? The people. Verse 8. So just, think about, okay, what would it be like to, take, time travel and be back and just be at this scene disgusting. Okay, that's what it would be if you're worried about blood or anything. Lots of blood compared to what we're used to. This is, of course, just part of the ancient world, right? Not just Israelites, but all pagan peoples practiced animal sacrifice. So blood is a part of religious ritual. It's a part of, again, your everyday life. If you eat meat, then you're probably the one killing it, preparing it, all of that. So these things aren't done for you. All of this is part of just everyday life for people. And so part of the religious ritual as well. The fact that we don't think about that when we come to worship, we don't think about blood at all, probably, is because of the spread of Christianity. There were a few other religions and philosophies in the East that I would say were also sort of banning animal sacrifice. But in the Roman Empire, the banning of animal sacrifice happened because of Constantine and his successors in the Roman Empire. So we don't think about usually blood, but on the other hand, maybe we do, or we should, because there's some familiar language here as well. In verse, what is this? Verse 7. He took the book of the covenant and read it. And then verse 8. This is, talking about the blood now, the blood of the covenant. That phrase, blood of the covenant, is one that's used in the New Testament to talk about Jesus' blood. All right? So actually, every time we assemble on the Lord's Day, we do encounter the blood. We do, to use Paul's language, have communion with or fellowship with. We partake of the blood of Christ, okay, the body and the blood. So this is actually a lot of Last Supper / Lord's Supper language here, where a covenant is, and we see this in Genesis and other places, anytime God makes a covenant, he seals it with a meal. So there's the blood of the covenant, and then you have the people spared in God's presence, eating and drinking together in the presence of God. So that language ought to actually sound familiar to us. This is language that's picked up in the New Testament. The other thing I'll say about this blood is that not only is it saving, it's redemptive blood. That there's a sacrifice here, and the lifeblood and all that symbolizes. And then with Christ, it's God himself offering himself on our behalf, that his own holy blood. There's something also, I think, kind of foreboding about the people saying, we hear the covenant being told to us, we hear it being read to us, and we are given this free will choice that says, will you do it? And we say, we will willingly, gladly do everything that you've just said. We will obey. And for an animal to be killed and that blood to be sprinkled on the people, that's sort of a signal as well that this is serious stuff, all right? And it doesn't come right out and say this, but it's like you're being sealed here with the symbols of life and death, all right? So if you disobey, that's going to be bad, okay? This blood has just been sprinkled on the people and on the altar. I think this is foreshadowing of what's going to happen in Exodus 32. All right. Anything else on either Lord's Supper or anything I mentioned there from chapter 24? Yeah, that's yeah, it's a good question. Um, what does it mean for the people to be sprinkled with blood? Um, so what you just said, I think that's a couple of the options actually, and it's ambiguous what that means. Does it mean each and every? First, it didn't tell us how many sacrifices. Maybe there were millions of sacrifices. Okay, probably not. But uh, it could be each and every individual. I take it more as a symbolic, you know. So I don't know that every child, you know, in every tent or whatever had to have blood sprinkled on him. But probably the people who were around and in proximity to the altar. And it's, you know, vessels, some sort of bowls or cups, you know, pots that were holding this blood. And I'm not sure it says what it was they were sprinkled with, but um, yeah, the logistics of it, it probably looked something like that. Yeah, never have. Yep. Uh, yeah, it's messy. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yep. So again, lots of blood here to go around. Yeah, Sharon. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 Well, yeah, sprinkled. You know, maybe there's a procession of people and then a recession, and so others come closer. Yeah, I mean, you have people. You could have the guy, you know, going out, and you could have the blood being passed down the pews, you know, or whatever, and they sprinkle themselves with it. No, that was a joke. Uh, but yeah, either they go out to the people or the people come too. So we used to do that here. People come forward for communion. That happened. Okay, I like that. Okay, good to know. All right, good. Anything else on 24? Yeah. Yep. Good segue here. If you look at the last verse here in chapter 24, verse 18, then Moses entered the cloud. So all that happened, all right? He entered the cloud as he went up on the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, all right? And then you get tabernacle regulations. That's what we're skipping right now. We will come back to it. Don't worry. But if you'll turn over to chapter 32, so you get tabernacle regulations from chapters 25 through 31. So again, narrative, there's the story, and then a little aside on instructions and laws concerning the tabernacle. And now, story again, chapter 32. So that's the skipping around we're doing here. Okay. Verse 1 of chapter 32. Everybody with me? When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain. So that's what I take it to be. So there's the time lapse there, if that's what you were asking, is these things happen. Okay, the blood was sprinkled on the people. They said, we will do all of this. We will do it. Moses stays up there for 40 days. Right after they say, we will do all of this, they say, well, where's Moses? I guess he's not coming back. Now what will we do? And this is the famous scene in chapter 32 of the golden calf. Yes, that's correct. Yes. Yes. So the shock that we're feeling here is the intended that the writer and that I want to convey here is they say we'll do it, and then the very next thing. Okay, so remember, there's been a buildup to this. I don't know if you recall, but we spent some time looking at this journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai was filled with a lot of grumbling and complaining, and we might say lack of trust, lack of faithfulness. Testing God, actually, is the language that's used as well. And God accommodates every time. And a lot of them, remember, were rational, reasonable requests. Hey, we'd like some water. Okay. But they also were accompanied by, it wasn't just, we like some food. It was, we really had it better off in Egypt. Remember the great food we had there? Oh, the good old days in Egypt, you know. Is God with us or not? That was the question they asked in chapter 17. Really insulting question to the God who has done all this for them. Is he really among us? Well, yeah, I thought so. Okay. All right. So God, I think, excuses a lot of that ignorance. Now they've had a chance to sit and listen to instructions from God. They have received in oral form and now read from the book of the covenant laws like, you will have no other gods before me. You will not make for yourself an idol to worship. Commandment 2. They say, yes, this all sounds lovely. We're going to do this. Sprinkled with the blood of the sacrifice and the blood of the covenant. And now this. So again, they're set up here, and this is the fallout from it. So Moses comes down from Mount Sinai. I think this is a familiar story, even if you didn't do the homework this time. You've probably heard this one before. He sees the Israelites worshiping the golden calf that Aaron had made. So this is not good. All right. Yeah. So Aaron's the one who suggested this, right? Well, they say, actually, make us gods. So this is verse 1 of chapter 32. They gathered around Aaron and said, make us gods, or a god. Moses, we don't know what happened to him. Aaron then says, take off the gold and jewelry and everything. So, not sure it was beginning was his suggestion, but he was definitely on board with it and complicit. Maybe he was afraid, maybe he was pressured. He talks about that actually later. He sort of makes an excuse about the people, you know. But yeah, Aaron, certainly that's one of the more shocking things that he is involved in this. I was going to say something else and it has slipped me, but maybe it'll come back. So Moses comes down from the mountain. He throws down the tablets on which were written the law, the 10 Commandments, and smashes them. Not only angry, I mean, he is angry about this, but he is channeling and in many ways a representative of God's anger here. All right? So it's not like he just flew off the handle. This is a symbol of the covenant has been broken. All right? This is a broken covenant now. Brand new. It's like the marriage just took place and we're still on the honeymoon. And adultery. That's what this is. Okay? Already broken. And Moses throws down, and this is a sign, at least from his perspective, of this breaking of the covenant. I know what I was going to say. This is a fall narrative. Think of like Genesis 3, paradise. In covenant, in fellowship, in proximity with God, Adam and Eve, and they break the covenant. They break the law, the one law he had for them. And it's shocking. How could they? Why? Like, where does that come from? How? This is Israel's fall here. So what's going to happen, right? And also, think about this, sandwiched in between tabernacle regulations and tabernacle construction. Chapter 32 here. This is the anti-tabernacle project. We've just seen, we haven't read it, but if you're reading in order here, we've just had 7 chapters of tabernacle instructions, how to worship God. And then we have this, again, I call it an anti-tabernacle project. So we do want to know, like, why did the Israelites go to idols? How could they be so foolish? Well, they were so real to them. I do want to say that. So calf, a golden calf, that's the kind of gods that were all around them in Egypt and in the ancient Near East. So this is familiar. When they say, look at verse 4, Aaron says, after making it, these are your gods, or you could just translate it, this is your God who brought you up out of Egypt. So it's not even clear that they're worshiping like Apis or another Egyptian god. They may think, we're worshiping Yahweh. We're worshiping the God of Israel. But we're doing it in a way that we like. We're fashioning something that we want to look at and bow down to. And that was the norm. It's unusual for a God not to be depicted. That's really unique in the ancient world. So, that's I think the context here that we need to keep in mind. It's sort of like, yeah, we'll let God be our God and go before us, provided we get to make him into our image and what we want. And so they offer peace offerings and they eat and drink, sort of like the elders did on the mountain in chapter 24. They do this in verse 6. All right, yes? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I say to Amanda, your daughter has. What? Oh, hey, Rachel. Sorry. Yeah. So what's happening there, right? It's sort of funny like that. I think that's exactly what's going on here. But it's also God sort of saying, okay, covenant's broken. They're not my people anymore. And you can have them, right? If this is the way this is going to be, you can have them. So that's verse 7. Your people whom you brought up out of Egypt. You see the same thing in chapter 33, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt. Up to this point, it's always, I'm the God who brought you up out of Egypt. So it's, you. Chapter 32, verse 11. Moses sought the favor of the Lord. Lord, Why should your anger burn against your people? So Moses is trying to say, no, they're still your people here, all right, whom you brought up out of Egypt. Right? 33:13. Moses says, if you are pleased with me, teach me your ways so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people, Moses says to God. You get to have them. All right. You said so. So, yeah, I think that's a valid observation there. Well, we're about out of time. We didn't get through 34, so what I want to do for next week is prepare for a little more focus on 32 through 34 here. We've already introduced Golden Calf. The question now is, what's going to happen? I mean, we know the rest of the story, but if you're just reading through this, again, it's like, I think the analogy here is somewhat helpful, is what's going to happen to the marriage? On the honeymoon, they cheated, right? The covenant was broken. Is there a future for this couple? Is there a future for them? Doesn't look like it, all right? And that's where we leave it here, and that's the question. You know, what is going to happen here with this people that, you know, Moses led up out of Egypt? All right, so let's read for next week 32 through 34 and just keep hanging on to this handout for that. And we can end our, well, good morning. Welcome. All right. Good to see Bob and Jim back. Yes. All right. Well, this is a welcome interruption, so thank you. And we always go overtime anyway, so you knew that was going to happen. Oh, yeah. Welcome, Gavin, also. Yes, thank you for showing up as well. Yes. Yeah, y'all do what you need to do. We're going to end just with a quick prayer here. God, we're so thankful for this time to open your word and study this word message from Exodus. We are grateful for this time to worship, to be called into your presence, and for your grace that invites us here. We're thankful for everyone who is here. We're thankful for Bob and Jim and their presence. Be with us now as we worship. In Jesus' name we pray.